Hello, everybody. I'm Alan. I hold shift. Donofrio.
My name is Andy Proper Neckrich.
And this is the Defuse. Let's get this thing lit. Let's talk about what's going on and the recap from everything happening from CDL Minnesota, what to expect during these couple of off days, quote unquote. And of course, we've got Paris like next week. It's weird to not have like a week off because of the movement, but I'm here for it. We're absolutely here for it because, well, where else would we be?
I definitely not out at a bar or a restaurant because that's not allowed
Nowhere.
yet where we are. Yeah, we would
You
literally be
know,
nowhere.
It's actually funny. I don't know if you've seen this, but someone had posted up like over the last week, like who has the highest spiked cases of COVID-19, like in this quote unquote second wave. In North Carolina's number 3, baby.
Yep, saw it. Saw it.
High
Literally woke
five,
up, I
dude.
looked at it,
Oh,
and I was just like, that's just great.
elbow
That's just,
bumps,
oh yeah,
dude.
no, you're right. You're right. You're
Elbow
right.
bumps. We gotta
Yeah.
elbow bump that. That's so
Good thing
weird,
my
dude.
arm is 6 feet long.
Is it?
Nope.
Your single arm is 6 feet long. Could you
Just
imagine
one.
if it actually was? That'd be nuts. But welcome. It's good to see you guys back. You're looking better every single day you come and watch us. It's true. It's absolutely true. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's just jump right in and start with how the games went from yesterday, from Sunday's playoffs, starting things off with Atlanta going up against the Los Angeles Guerrillas. I don't think anyone would have expected that this game was going to be close. I think everyone mostly expected it was going to be a 3-1. I think including us. The only
Yeah.
map that we kind of saw LAG potentially taking was maybe the first search and destroy. But I will say, and we kind of talked about this, that if LAG were to be able to win a series versus the Atlanta FaZe, they would need to take both search and destroys and steal a respawn. They came out and stole a respawn map 1.
I mean, say steal as a very loose term, because when you're looking at Atlanta all weekend long, it's no sheer coincidence that they found themselves in a multitude of opportunities to have to reverse sweep, and that's just because the respawn game was so weak. So you say steal, I say that's a very loose term, just because yes, although you had Vivid, Saints, Blast showing up at certain points of time, Decimate able to do what they were able to showcase as well. It's just truly, was it enough? I don't think it was enough to contest against maybe Florida or Dallas, but against Atlanta, something was certainly off with them this weekend.
Look, I'm gonna hold to my word. I used the word steal and I meant it. They stole that map away. Yeah, Atlanta had a ton of breaks, but at the end of the game, LAG did enough to get to that third rotation, and then they out rotated Atlanta between P5, P1, P2 in that third rotation, and well, and P3 really beyond that. They were down in that game though near the end, but playing perfectly through first, second, and third, going into that third rotation of Hills, that was a steal away. And I think that Atlanta plays a little bit too greedy. You know, that P5 late break they went for, trying to get themselves over the 230 point mark, didn't really pan out for them. And I think that's a stolen game. The weird thing about this series was we expected LAG to be able to take, they needed to take both the search and destroys, is what we said.
Right.
They found neither of them. Although, to be fair, on Piccadilly, again, we actually were just talking about this. The auto mantle that Blast got kind of threw away an opportunity where I think he really did have a chance to get that 1v2 at the end of the day. But that would have been the game right there. That would have been a 6-4 win for LAG instead of going to round 11. The one thing that I'm super surprised by is not necessarily that LAG didn't win the search and destroy, but they won the first hard point and they smoked him in the domination. It's their third dom win this year, and they beat him by about 45 points. What the heck?
I honestly couldn't really tell you. I mean, just going into Hackney Yard as a whole, yeah, that was their third domination win. I don't remember specifically what was their other domination map win because it's just so forgettable, right? I mean,
It
one
was a
and
long
nine.
time ago, too.
Yeah, yeah, it really was 1-9 on Hackney Yard for LAG, where Atlanta were 8-2 walking into this exact domination. But I mean, when you're just thinking about the greed, it's not even really there for Atlanta this time around. They just literally couldn't get anything going in the middle of the map, and this is just where LAG were just so good. I mean, LAG, where they were just shy of 3 minutes, were already in an AB hold, and they were already pushing Atlanta all the way back into the docks building. When they were on the favorite side, it was something that was really nice to see. The SMG presence for LAG were certainly on point throughout this entire Hackney Yard domination. But when you got Aqua themselves dropping 25 plus kills with only 17 deaths, you know that something's clicking with this team.
I mean, domination for Atlanta has been super strong for the last 2 months. I mean, before they lost against LAG, the last one that they lost was to the Paris Legion. That was a 3-point game. That honestly, I think Atlanta kind of again played a little bit too safe on that gunrunner, where Paris was able to kind of, again, kind of get their momentum going. But to lose by as much as Atlanta lost by, there's definitely something churning in the Respawn that is definitely not what you want to see if you're an Atlanta FaZe fan. But on the opposite side, for the Los Angeles Guerrillas, we talked about these guys on Friday after they had a pretty good showcase as they were able to beat the Toronto Ultra. But then they came out on Saturday and they split the series as they lose to Florida, beat Chicago. How inspired are you about this Los Angeles Guerrillas team? And I guess the most poignant question is this season still salvageable for LAG after they found 2 wins this last weekend?
I think it certainly is. There's a lot to learn from these individuals here on Los Angeles Guerrillas. The Saints came in, sure, on Saturday they started off relatively cold, but then they heated right the hell up, and you're able to see what the talent of Saints is able to bring to the table. The chemistry is obviously there, and again, when you have Aqua dropping numbers comparatively where they really statistically just haven't all season long, then you end up having a lot of good bright spots for this team. Later on down the road, you're thinking about them in the 10th overall spot right now in CDL points.
Which is a big boost, by the way.
It is a huge boost, but they walked in here literally dead last, and now you're looking at a great bright point for them to not only be able to walk past a certain opportunity where they're not starting immediately in the losers bracket come champs, but you also have the ability to surpass, I would even say, Paris Legion and Minnesota Rocker coming off this previous weekend.
The thing about it, why I think that this season is 100% still salvageable for the Los Angeles Guerrillas, this has been a team that has been incredible at search and destroy. And throughout the weekend, we saw not just improvements in their hard point with Saints, like you mentioned, but they're able to win a domination. That has been the boon of this squad since really we went, period. It's just since the season started. I mean, they've won 3 total domination matches. The ones that they were winning were not exactly convincing up until they beat the Atlanta FaZe, the #1 team in domination in the league. They're able to beat by 40 plus. That's definitely inspiring to say the least. My biggest thing about this LAG squad, and you hit on it, the fact that they are now 10th in the standings, they win 2 more games, they're in 7th. That's massive. We talk about how the playoff format's going to look like, and being somewhere right around 5 through 8 is a really good spot for you to be, considering that you've only won 4 games really so far, and you stole away a 5th. So it's wild to think that LAG is in a position to where they could possibly grow. The bad news about LAG trying to get up in the stock on their standings is that still around them in the same ballpark are teams like Optic Gaming LA and the New York Subliners, who show no signs of slowing down anytime soon. And you've also got the London Royal Ravens, who obviously are looking pretty positive. So if you're LAG, yeah, obviously you need to keep crafting, keep working your craft, especially on the Respawn specifically if you want to try to improve. But you're going to need some help. You need Paris to not play all that well. You need to make sure that Seattle, Toronto, if you ever play those guys again, you have to make sure that you're beating them so that way you're growing that differential as much as possible. And then if you could find a way to steal series against maybe teams like Atlanta FaZe, like they almost did yesterday, that's just a little bit of extra weight into your pockets. But my biggest concern about LAG is kind of the same conversations we've held about like teams like Optic before, Paris before, London before. Consistency. Will there actually be consistency here? Or did Vivid just have an incredible weekend? That's my biggest question mark, because it just felt like watching this LAG squad, especially play maps like Hackney Yard Hardpoint, that things were just kind of getting gifted into their favor. A couple of rotations where they weren't necessarily going for the right timings, but they were gifted it by the spawns. And it turned into them playing a much cleaner version of Hardpoint, but it wasn't, I don't think, necessarily by their own choices or decisions. They kind of got gifted a couple opportunities. They made the best out of them. That's where I'm kind of looking at this LAG squad saying I'm not 100% convinced that what we saw this last weekend is what we're going to see in any weekend following up into playoffs.
Yeah, let's go ahead and just play along with that, right? Like, let's say yes, they were gifted it, but look at how well they capitalize on those gifts from the Atlanta FaZe too. Again, coming in here as a top 3 team, being able to capitalize on those so-called gifts is really, if you want to be inspired by anything, it's literally just that too. So I mean, again, just to hit the point on home that if you are LAG, you're not playing at Paris, but we're going to see you in New York the following weekend. So, I mean, you're going to be watching this relatively close, where you do have New York Subliners, where you do have Paris Legion, Toronto, and Minnesota
Ravens, and
London. Yeah, you have all of those teams to be able to sit there and just work your behind off, so that way you can put yourself in a better spot come champs, because there's still, to
Yeah.
hate to say it, because we are at the tail end. I mean, you still got solid 3 more weekends of LAG to where they could really start surpassing some of these other teams that we could see Vivid continuously pop off, and then the word consistency either reigns true, or it's got to be a question mark leading all the way up to chance for the Gorillas.
This is one of those things that if there were to be a late run, a late Cinderella run, LAG, I think, has already started to kind of lay the foundation to potentially do that, but we're still a long way off from that potentially happening. Let's talk Dallas and Florida coming up next. This is another series that I know I was talking about, saying that the winner of this series wins the event in total. Spoiler alert, I was right. But it's one of those things that it just came down to the SMG gameplay between both of these squads I was most excited to see. For the side of the Florida Mutineers, you're looking at Florida having already at this point beat the Chicago Huntsmen in 5. Now you have the chance to play up against another top 3 squad. And because we already knew that Atlanta beat LAG, if you beat Dallas, you have the chance to take down all of the 3 top squads above you. We'll save the conversation versus Atlanta later, but talking about this one in particular, you're feeling pretty solid about Florida. Granted, again, that hardpoint acting yard, they were also in the beneficiaries of being gifted a favorable spawn on rotation, but they looked incredible in the first one on Gunrunner versus Dallas, and they looked absolutely incredible on St. Petro. But I'll say this, I was not necessarily as impressed with the Florida Mutineers in this one as much as I was impressed, or I would say depressed, about Dallas and their banning phase coming forward, because the way, pardon me, I just read the Atlanta phase roster things. They actually lost the domination on Gunrunner. But the fact that they were able to get a Ramaza, they were able to get a Gunrunner, for their hard points, I thought was kind of a mishap from Dallas, as those were the 2 maps that Florida has been looking not just incredible on this weekend, but also looked really good on the weekend before.
Yeah, depending on how scrims were all going for Dallas, maybe they could have been feeling themselves. We know that they are very confident. When they have those confidence individuals coming through, then they absolutely start smoking on every single turn. I mean, take that 6-1 Gunrunner Search and Destroy victory. That's dominance, plain and simple. Where Dallas were only 7-1, losing to London on that game map mode combo, I would feel very confident about that. But when you're thinking about this team as a whole, for Florida Mutineers, you got to be looking at just this specific weekend, because what Awakening brings to the table for this team is that very impressive SMG lineup. We've been talking about this all on the Defuse through our opening shows in this entire previous weekend, that when you have a stellar SMG lineup, then you have to be getting a little bit more creative. That's where things can definitely get a little bit more haywire, because of what Awakening is able to do for this team of Florida Mutineers. Again, we'll get to the point where we talk about what that does for them against Atlanta FaZe, being able to be that flex player and allowing Skies to be able to pull out the sub from time to time as well. But when you're going up against Dallas Empire, it's not necessarily a team that you can even take for granted. I mean, even in that opening hardpoint on Gunrunner, which Florida did win 250 to 169, pretty damn convincing if you ask me. Dallas Empire, they were putting themselves on a pretty pristine amount of rotations early on. Keep in mind, you from 2 to 3, giving up scrap time to Florida, but within the first couple of seconds, Florida just walked in and absolutely obliterated. There was always somebody working in the back line. There's always somebody working on the pinch, and then when the SMGs just roll on forward, they just smoked Dallas in that hard point.
The thing that I was most excited about this matchup for the side of the Florida Mutineers was not necessarily would Awakening again be able to find himself favorable matchups versus the SMG line, but would Florida's SMG line as a whole step up? And they did. That's the big thing that we've been kind of wondering. Would Havoc and Frosty be able to meet up against what we've seen so far from the 2 most recent additions to this team out of the challenger scene of Pharaoh and Awakening? And in this series, it was yes, from the get-go as well. Havoc and Frosty played a great map 1. And that's one of the things that, I look back and I think back to Frosty and Enigma 6. When Enigma 6 was great, Frosty played consistently. When Enigma 6 was not great, Frosty was all over the place. And that's one of the things that I feel like will be another trend going into this year for the Florida Mutineers. And you could throw Havoc into the same conversation, because it was kind of the same thing with Gen G. When they were great, it wasn't just Envoy playing well. Havoc played really well behind him. And now that Havoc and Frosty have showcased that, yes, we can step up even when Awakening and Pharaoh aren't having mammoth games, that makes me believe that this Florida Mutineers squad did not just have a good weekend, they're about to have a great back end of the season. And that's the biggest thing that, when we were looking at this, with who would have thought here of this entire series, I don't think either of us were looking at this Florida Mutineers squad before the weekend started and we're going to say that, yes, they would not just be in the playoff, but they would make a grand final.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, again, like you said, who would have thought? How did we get here? Nobody, probably heading into the
I
weekend. I
mean,
mean,
where did you have them finishing this weekend?
no, definitely not first. I mean, it's so hard to judge, right? I mean, you get Awakening coming in. They've been scrimming with the team for what, like a week, and they're able to come in and find an incremental value inside a game that they have been starting to show a little bit more strengths week after week for this team. It's so hard to put it into perspective that Florida would just outright finish in top 2, top 3. I mean, for this team as a whole, when you're thinking about them heading in towards the Minnesota weekend, they absolutely smacked a lot of good teams too. I mean, call it what you will, and again, we'll get to the grand finals soon after this conversation. But I mean, think about it. I mean, going up against Chicago looked very good in certain points too, and even in that LA Gorillas match, they did really well. Even for Gorillas that were coming in for an entire weekend, that they were starting to pick up the pace for themselves. Florida Mutineers were just always one step ahead of a lot of teams that they were facing. And to go to map 5 with Dallas Empire, not only being able to take it in the 6-4, I believe was that final scoreline on Search and Destroy, but just to be able to take
around
the
11,
series.
actually, I think.
Yeah. So, I mean, regardless of the matter, still being able to take that versus Chicago, versus Dallas, and then grand finals too. I think myself included in a lot of naysayers that where they didn't have Florida finishing in top 3 overall. Definitely going to be rethinking that standpoint for sure.
I was cautiously optimistic about this Florida team. I think they were a little bit blessed by the pool that they had. All they had to do was either A, beat Chicago when you're in the playoff, or B, put a good contest for Chicago and then get through Toronto and LAG, which obviously that ended up being the case. What I was most surprised, though, again, I'm not trying to take anything away from Awakening, because we've watched him play a lot, not just this year, but kind of his upcoming from when he played at Black Ops 4. He was always a solid player. He was always a consistent player. I didn't think he brought the ability to carry a team against the caliber of opponents that Florida played this weekend so damn quickly. I mean, we saw when Pharaoh got introduced to the roster, they didn't come in, and Pharaoh didn't just come in and then instantly see success, right? I mean, when he first got subbed in, they had a really tough series. They had to play up against both Atlanta and Dallas at the Los Angeles home series, of which they did not win a single map versus either Atlanta or Dallas. Pharaoh filled a very particular role. I thought Awakening filled a more particular role than Pharaoh had to. The good news, though, about Awakening coming in and knowing that there was going to be a roster swap with Mox going out and Awakening coming in earlier in the season, not the season, but earlier in the week, I guess you could say, was they were able to get that practice. I just did not expect them to be that prepared and that polished against 3 very good respawn teams. I mean, they only lost 2 respawn maps, and those were both versus Chicago, and that was both in the first match of the weekend. And they were both very close. They were both 204 plus to 250 losses. That was the most surprising thing for me. Also, on top of that, the fact that you also saw the Florida Mutineers go 3-1 in the domination this week, where last time we saw them at their own home series, they barely put up a fight on domination versus both New York and Minnesota. So that was the most surprising thing. And I never would have expected Florida to get I expected them to get into the playoffs, but I had them finishing top 4. I didn't think they would be able to beat up against an Atlanta squad. Obviously, they didn't play up against them in the first round, but impressive things from Florida this week, and I never would have figured that they would have had as much of a showing as they did.
I mean, again, who would have thought? Not me. That's for sure. When you're thinking about this Florida squad, I mean, you said it so wonderfully. For Awakening to come in and play such a pivotal role to where they can anchor, to where they can pop off at a moment's notice, their experience with this game, and even at the tail end of Black Ops 4, is far superior than what you would think for a player that's been playing this game for years. It's just impressive, really. I remember talking to you back at the end of the Black Ops 4 tenure of Awakening too, and it always came around that this kid's really talented. And even towards a lot of different Challengers events too, you're able to see the talent shining on through weekend in, week out, that this kid is really talented. They understand their position on the map. They can fill that role at a moment's notice. And just when you think that it's just Awakening that you got to be concerned with, then Pharaoh pops off. If you're already handling one of those, then Awakening's right there. But if you're not concerned with either of those two, then Havoc is yeeting himself into your enemy line, and then he's absolutely obliterating you with the MP5 too. And then don't forget Skies. Now you can put Florida Mutineers in the realm of possibility that any given moment of time, all 5 of these members can pop off at any single game map mode, and that's what's really scary about Florida heading on forward through these weekends.
And going into the Atlanta series, that's obviously the grand finals coming up next year that we want to talk about. I'm glad that you brought up Skies because that's a good natural segue. In that grand finals, he played absolutely incredibly. And it's one of those things that main
Out of
ARs
his
in this
mind.
game don't necessarily get the same kind of respect as maybe they did in Black Ops 4 because, again, we've seen it from now Clay and as well beyond that. We also had Skies in that grand finals where they just had moments where there was nothing going on. So when we talk about Atlanta versus Florida in that grand finals, the fact that Florida came out, they were able to take map number 1, which has been, again, a concern for Atlanta now, a couple of games in a row. That's what exactly you have to do. You have to come out with the fire. You have to come out in a grand finals and make sure that you're kind of sticking it to Atlanta and saying that we're not just backing away. We are out here to showcase that we deserve to be here and we've had the potential of taking down another major team.
I mean, again, that first hard point score, 250 to 146 shift, wasn't even close. It was not even close. And again, the conversation comes around to really be at how many gifts is Atlanta the Santa Claus of Call of Duty at this point? I honestly couldn't really put a pin in it, just because for Atlanta FaZe as a whole, this team it just could not piece together a first map victory. Their respawn was just sloppy beyond belief. And you brought up the word greed earlier when we were talking about them in the first match that they had. And I think that's a really good conversation to really push on forward, because when it comes down to Florida and lack of hesitation and being in a proper place at a right time, they were there time and time out, able to break in P2 towards the second set of hills. If you don't understand how hard it really is just to break in towards P2 on Gunrunner, it is pretty damn difficult. Obviously, you could do it if you have the firm setup, but when Atlanta FaZe are trying to get a little bit too greedy with their positioning and they're trying to take early control of showers and they're trying to take early control of the coal mines, and then you're already met with Havoc taking a 1v3 towards the munitions depot, yeah, things can get out of hand because what's soon to follow through the cargo containers? Florida Mutineers. And although this really seems like it's Atlanta's thing, that they don't find themselves in early rotations, that they end up breaking the hill more often than not when the enemy team finds those early rotations, this time it was Florida. Through every single hill, it seemed, apart from maybe a handful on P5 or P3, that Florida Mutineers weren't the first to rotate, that they were the ones letting Atlanta rotate through. And then they got absolutely mollywopped in the opening gunfight, thanks to players such as Awakening, Skies,
Yeah.
Sparrow. Every single one of them showed up.
The biggest thing was there were so many instances where Florida was just picking apart everybody this weekend on their setups on hardpoint, and none more the case than the Hackney Yard that we saw for map number 4, where honestly Florida, I got a little scared that they're about to be bounced back on because they were able to break P2 not once but twice. They had a good setup for P5, but still allowed Atlanta to nearly bring that one completely back, sending it to that third rotation P1, where Atlanta would have had the ability to lock down the tire shop if we saw a second hard point. And again, I still don't think in all of the hard point Hackney Yards we've seen this year, I've ever seen a third rotation get to P2 on Hackney Yard. I don't think it's ever happened.
It's very unheard of.
The longest I've seen maps go into the third rotation is Gunrunner gets to the P3 for like 5 seconds. We've seen Azir Cave get to the soccer field a couple different times. And that's about it. Ramaza's usually done third rotation P1. Hackney Yard, third rotation P1. Petros, yeah, third rotation P1, sometimes P2. But it's one of those things that I thought for sure Atlanta we were going to be able to bring that one back. But too much strength to the mix, though. Once again, Pharaoh played lights out, and the SMG line played lights out. I mean, this was the unexpected contender versus the expected team of the grand finals. And beyond that, now we've got ourselves a very unlikely 2 times champion. The only times that we've seen teams win 2 home series have been Dallas and now Florida. Out of all of the teams that came in this week, I did not expect Florida to not just win, but the fact that they beat every single one of the top 3 teams this weekend, that in its own right, I think says more than a 2 times champion, home series champion, whatever you want to call it, could ever say.
Yeah, I mean, you bring yourself back to how Florida won their previous championship. Not a lot of stronger teams were there, but I think that this puts a a certain question mark to how strong those teams really are, and more of an exclamation mark on how strong Florida is now that Awakening has
Yeah.
come on board. Because again, we brought up the word enabler for what Saints did for LA Gorillas. Look at how much enabling Awakening is able to do for the rest of the team. Again, we talked about Skies earlier on, and now I'm going to hit the point on home too. That Skies again had a phenomenal grand finals, absolutely popped off, and sure, again, you could chalk a lot of these things up to gifts, but again, it comes down to a better team to be able to capitalize on these mistakes that are being handed for such a star-studded team like Atlanta FaZe. I mean, you could also raise the argument that Prisa and Abizi, that they had a terrible weekend, sure, but when you
Sid
are
had
that
out of all of them, I would say, had the worst weekend.
uncharacteristic, yeah,
Yeah,
uncharacteristic weekend for Sim
especially in the
too.
finals.
Yeah, so I mean, Celium can only do so much, right? Like, you can save your MVP champs aside because I mean, like, Celium can literally only do so much for this roster at certain moments of time too, and it can't go unnoticed too. You tweeted this out, my good friend. When you're talking about map bans and vetoes and everything to come through, what were you thinking when you brought Florida
can't
to a
let
same Petro
Petro.
domination? What were you
Cannot let him play
thinking?
it.
What do you thought? What do you think was
Cannot.
going to happen, LA? What do you think was going to happen? Let's be honest here.
Yeah,
What do you
you
think?
just don't stop playing them on that map. And the last time we said that was when they played at the Atlanta home series, where that's all they played was St. Petro Hardpoint.
Guys went 27-11 here, man.
Dude, and that's the one thing about it. You know, we've seen Skies play a multitude of different ways, depending on who he's playing up against. There was the first time they had played St. Petro Dom when they played it up against LAG. He was just sitting at the back of the map, not having to do anything. But against the Atlanta FaZe, what he realizes that he's going up against a counterpart like Major Maniac, who likes to play a little bit more passive. What he could do is get a little bit more involved and force Major Maniac to be out on an island, not doing anything. And that's what he started to really kind of pop off. And that's the one thing, you know, you think back to when Mox is in this lineup, when you watch Florida play on this map mode combination, Mox was very uncertain of what he was going to use, what he was going to play. There was that period of time where Florida was trying to pull out 2 ARs. It wasn't really working. And Skies was forced to kind of give up the main AR for Mox, who again struggled pretty much all through this year on an SMG. Skies has been able to do it all. And sometimes he doesn't necessarily get the credit that I think he deserves as being the best AR in the game. Said it. And he has been incredible. He's the best AR in the game. I don't think you could really contest up against that right now. I wouldn't say Formal is. I think that what Clayster does is solid, but Skies does it better. I don't think Major Maniac, obviously we saw it in the head-v-head here. Skies outperformed Major Maniac in every single map just about, besides really the Search and Destroy. Skies is the best AR in the game right now, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the only other one that I could probably think to make another firm line in the sand would probably be Octane.
Wuskin? Oh, okay, Octane.
Yeah, I mean, well, Wuskin's the best sniper in the game, but as far as AR presence,
it's hard to label someone as the best AR in the game when their team is the worst in the league. It's just,
all right. I mean, like,
it's really tough to kind of put a frame around that. But I think what Skies does for this team is he's the best AR.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up the point of being aggressive too, because I mean, when you think about just this domination as a whole, and what makes Florida so damn good at this is how well that they play against their opponents. Again, trying to passively play in St. Petro and not able to take away restaurant control, or even when you're on the A flag, putting players in hazmat, just wasn't there for Atlanta. Again, pushing it that much further, always having players. They always had at least 2 players cycling in the top and bottom floor of restaurant, and they always ended up having a player being an absolute pest in towards the A flag. And even when Atlanta found a C flag flip, they had no presence on B. They say Florida still had players in restaurant. That the only reason why the spawns flipped were because Florida were also getting aggressive pushing past restaurant, and they got the 1 kill on Awakening over by Market because Atlanta spawned over by P1. So when you're thinking about it as a whole, again, Shift tweeted it out. I'm going to keep saying it until I don't see it anymore. Don't face Florida on domination, St. Petrograd. You know better. You know better, CDL. Come on.
That's the way it goes. But I want to transition to talk about some of the hardpoint woes that we saw from not just Atlanta. Again, Atlanta, the image on screen is going to haunt you, I think, throughout this weekend. That P2 that they played this weekend was not really all that solid at all. This is a squad that just went 3-5 in hardpoint just this weekend. But even when they played up against New York and Optic last weekend, they went 1-1 against them. You take a look at what Atlanta's been able to do or not been able to do versus some of the best hardpoint teams in the game. They're 3-3 versus Dallas. They're 2-2 versus Florida. They're 1-3 versus Minnesota, and they're now 3-3 versus the New York Subliners. There is something at the core where Atlanta has now been figured out. Again, they were the best hardpoint team of the game early because they were playing the fastest. How many times have you heard Merck say things like, it's like playing a 6v5 when you go up against the Atlanta FaZe on hardpoint? They're all over the map all the time. However, when they are now out heavily slaying their opponents, they're not winning hard points right now. And that's not just right now. It's over the last 3 weeks or so that we've seen this kind of be a cause for concern. But beyond just Atlanta, this is not an exempt conversation either for teams like Dallas, who we consider to be at the top 3. They're 3-3, like I mentioned, versus Atlanta, but they're 1-5 versus Chicago. They're 1-2 versus Florida, and they're 2-4 versus Minnesota. The only team that's currently in our top 5 that holds a positive differential in hardpoint matches versus other solid teams is Chicago. And surprisingly enough, it's at Minnesota, but barely, only because they hold the edge versus Atlanta, Dallas, and Florida. There is something that is to be said about this. The team that is currently listed as the number 2 team in hardpoint cannot beat the top 4 teams, not convincingly beat the top 4 teams in hardpoint right now. That's concerning.
I think it's greatly concerning, again, if you're an Atlanta FaZe fan, because when you think about what Merck is saying, and I believe this came from a Dallas Empire scrim at the very early bits of the CDL season, that it felt like facing 6 members on this enemy team. But when you go back and you truly dissect the grand finals of Atlanta versus Florida on their hard points, it damn near looked like it was, or on that one hard point, excuse me, of Gunrunner, it looked like it was like a 5v3, because you have Priesta only going 2026, BZ going 2029. And although Simp dropped 30, which is still a nice scoreline, we always see Simp doing very well in hardpoint, but their team is never really there to kind of back up that kill pressure, and they're always getting kind of outslayed by the other 5 members on the enemy team. This has been a new take that's been coming around for Atlanta for about the previous 2, if not 3 weekends that we've seen them. And this is what's really troublesome for them, is that maybe you can feel like you're playing with 6 members on your team, but when you're playing so fast and then you don't end up seeing players like Havoc or Pharaoh working their way into your backline, they find 1 kill and then they flip the spawns. You're playing so fast and then you put yourself in an unfavored side of the map. That's why P2, especially for that Hackney Yard, was so easy to break for Florida. It's very scary as a circumstance for Atlanta that they can find very influential amount of kills, but they can never substantially keep themselves ever so present on the map because they're always trying to push on forward, whether they're looking for the next objective. They never really took the time in this Hackney Yard hardpoint to reinforce themselves on the money hills like P2.
There's something to be said about the lack of efficiency on their zoning when it comes to those big hills, I think. And it's not just for Atlanta that's a cause for concern. We saw it with Dallas as well in the not the grand finals, but the semis versus Florida. And taking the other side of the coin, seeing Florida get that many breaks and have that many successful holds and finding good key rotations like on Hackney Yards going from 5 to 1, things like that. That's why I think that this Florida team could potentially be the real deal, not just now, but in the future. One of the things that we have to talk about, though, I actually posed this question up, and I need to make sure I swap over to my Twitter to make sure I see what the results look like. I posed the question. I think it's one worth a conversation. When it comes to all of the players that we've seen come out of the Challengers scene so far, whether it was just from the Minnesota launch weekend or in Awakening's case a little bit later on after he played through the circuit a little bit deeper, which player from the Challengers to the CDL has had the best story to follow so far?
Oh, I voted for that. I said Awakening, flat out. And I think that this weekend is probably a firm circumstance of why you're able to make this argument that it is Awakening. I mean, again, when you have players coming into the CDL, they find value, sure. Mac was able to do things and help out New York at a very slow pace through 2 different weekends. We saw that New York subliners in that second weekend that Mac was there skyrocketed for New York subliners. And then they were in a truer form than where they found themselves at the beginning of the season. But when you come in to the CDL in your opening weekend and you win a championship beating all 3 top teams in the league, I don't think that there's much of an argument that could be said for many other people on that list. I mean, yes, although impressive, it's not as top of the mountain that Awakening was able to showcase this previous weekend. I can sit here and I can tell you stats all day long, but the easiest thing that you could definitely take away is that Awakening came in for Mox and they won a championship.
I
Plain
think
simple.
I think the recency bias would agree with you, and the poll currently also does agree with you. But I think looking
Thank you,
forward,
Paul.
the player that I'm actually most excited to watch to see how his season ends up is actually Mac, because I think if
Sure.
Mac comes through and he's able to make New York a top 5, top 4, top 3 team, I think that has similar kind of shades of like what Sip did last year with the United, but I would say even more impressively so, because Sip got onto a roster full of absolute all-stars. And that United squad was strong even without Sip. The most impressive thing about Sip last year was the fact that he, on the Atlanta FaZe Black squad, he was able to win championships and then come into United and win championships, kind of like what Awakening just recently did.
Hmm.
But I think as far as turning an entire team around, Mac is the guy you're looking at to potentially do that. Awakening, if he plays extremely well, you're happy with it. It's going to make Florida that much stronger. But Florida, at its core right now, they didn't need Awakening as much as New York needs Mac right now. That's the whole thing that I'm kind of looking at as far as in the long term, why I think I'm more excited to see what Mac is able to do with New York. Now, if New York starts to fall off, obviously the case is made that Awakening's impact would be higher at the end of the season, especially if Florida continues to play it the way they just did. But yes, I agree with you that out of recency bias, Awakening has been the most excited to play. I think for a number of reasons. Number one, casted this guy at Anaheim in his first outcoming play when he's playing with Excalibur, with Willett and D'Lo. That was the first time they really kind of busted through the scene, upsetting a couple of big teams. But then they did it at Miami Finals, and they didn't have the greatest performance at Champs. But also seeing Awakening go from a all challengers year so far. I mean, completely all challengers year so far. Starting back at Minnesota, where he only finished top 48, by the way. Then he gets to the online series, goes fourth, second, first, second, and then gets picked up. That has been the most impressive thing as far as, yes, the path to pro works when you're somebody like Awakening who's able to find results through that system. That's why I think he's the most immediately exciting right now.
I want to go back to that point too, and just talking about Mac too, because I am on the Mac Bell type train for sure. But when you go back and you look at their previous weekend, what was it at Seattle? They didn't exactly have really tough
Right.
competition until they saw Chicago in the final in the semifinals, excuse me, to where they lost 3-1. I don't have the exact score and number lines for you to be able to read off, but again, Awakening came in and was able to be there for the mix and went more than positive through all three of those very tough matches and found that impact. So again, the word consistency will come to mind here as we head into Paris, to
Yeah.
where we're actually going to be able to see both of these teams, although in different groups. It's going to be exciting to see if New York are able to beat OGLA in the first match, and then we'll more than likely end up facing Atlanta because it's Atlanta versus Toronto in that round number 2, or wherever these two teams end up going soon after. But for Florida and New York at this point, when you're thinking about that poise question, which is a really good one to think about, come when we're talking about Rookie of the Year at the end of the season, it's definitely going to be opened up a little bit more
Oh,
wide
yeah.
after the weekend of Paris.
Agreed. Let's talk power rankings, though. This was a surprise weekend for a lot of different reasons, obviously, with Florida taking the championship, but also teams like Chicago not making the playoff, Minnesota not able to win a series. I'll give you the easy one. Who's got the highest raise in stock? Who's got the lowest fall in stock after this weekend?
Wow, really, really softballed that question in there
You're
for me. Huh?
welcome.
I'd say
You're welcome.
I felt like this was a machine pitch, and you put it on like 22 miles per hour. Is it?
Big fat softball, dude.
Woo! Oh man. Look, if you're not putting your stonks in Florida Mutineers after this weekend, then something's honestly wrong with you. They were able to take fourth place in the overall standings over Minnesota Rocker. Fantastic outing from them. And again, consistency is going to come to mind when we see them in Paris. If there's anyone that definitely lost a lot of stonks along the way, it's a very easy thing to say that it sure is Chicago Huntsmen, as we did not see
Ah.
them play well at all. But I'm going to go ahead and even push it that much further, that I lost a lot of stocks in Minnesota Rocker. Minnesota Rocker just are lackluster. They're not that exciting team that we saw that were able to take it to Atlanta FaZe. They were not that exciting team soon to follow. So again, for Minnesota Rocker, they got a lot of work ahead of them if they want to be able to raise their stocks as far as power rankings are concerned. But for Chicago Huntsmen, I mean, until you figure out what the heck is going wrong in some of these respawn moments and search and destroy, you're going to continuously lose to teams such as Florida and honestly, London Royal Ravens. I'm excited to see what they're able to do against Chicago Huntsmen now as well.
For me, it's obvious. I think I'll just take this one step further. Florida did not have the highest rise. My initial interpretation right now is Florida's the best team in the game. They're my number one in the power rankings
A
right
lot of
now,
stocks.
and I think a lot of it is simply because there is question on what's going on with Atlanta. Um, I would actually be willing to say that Atlanta actually falls to number 3 off of the immediate, and Dallas stays number 2. But for me, I don't even know if I'll have Minnesota in the top 8 right now, which is wild to think. But you look back at the last 3 outings that they've had, they've only won 4 hard points. They've only won 4 search and destroys. They've only won 2 dominations. That's over the course of 8 games. They don't hold a positive win-loss ratio in any mode. That's coming off the back end. If you want to look even further, since we've been online, the Minnesota Rocker have not done well in search and destroy unless they played up against a team called the Seattle Surge, which is not a surprise because it's a team
That
called the
doesn't really
Seattle
see.
Surge.
Yeah, it doesn't say much. It really does not say much.
Man, I want to believe that this Minnesota team has the potential to be a top 5 squad. I think that they do. I think that they've showed us that.
Sure.
But the lack of growth and forward progress has me extremely concerned.
Look, some of your concern from this previous weekend could also be, Exceed coming in at the last second to replace Alex due to an injury with a thumb. But even more so,
put that matchup though, out of I don't even consider that one because it is a
Yeah.
weird situation. Even if you take that out of the mix, the win-loss ratios are still not good.
Yeah, since we come online, I mean, you said it, right? Like, since we've come online, Minnesota Rocker have continuously gone further down, and they have been losing and losing and losing. We're just not seeing the same slaying power. I mean, GodRx with the scope, don't get me wrong, is absolutely filthy at certain amounts of time, but I mean, it seems not going off on these hard points and is not commanding a lot of these opening engagements in Search and Destroy that we did
Right.
see on land. And when you don't have that same oppressive ability coming into towards our online status that we are currently living in right now, you're going to lose a lot of value in the stocks. And again, just a very small grain of seasoning that comes through with the Exceed coming in last minute to replace for an injured Alex. But at the same point in time, even when Alex was there on online, just to make this all complete with a beautiful bow, it's just lackluster.
Indeed the case. Let's do the quick rundown here. Let's talk Paris, the City of Light. That's coming up next, obviously, for our home weekend. This upcoming weekend that'll be coming through. The teams that are participating here, Atlanta, Dallas, Florida, London, I think are the 4 that I'm most excited to see for multiple of reasons. But you've also got New York, Optic, Paris themselves, naturally, and the Toronto Ultra. The matchups as they look forward in Group A, Florida plays up against Paris. Dallas plays up against London. In Group B, Optic Gaming plays up against New York. Big storylines in that one. And then Toronto plays up against Atlanta. So, as you're going forward to Paris, my biggest thing is not only there's not a lot of time in between the last weekend and this upcoming weekend, but I want to get predictions from you here first and foremost.
Oh, of course you do.
Does Florida go back to back in this weekend?
I mean, hey, when you're thinking about it, I think my most exciting first round match is definitely London versus Dallas. Who's going to come out on top of that? Because you're definitely going to be facing Florida. I'm sorry, Paris. I know you want to do well in your home event, but you're not going to beat Florida in that opening round. Not with what we just saw from Florida in this previous weekend. If skies can continuously go off, you're not going to win that one out. I'm sorry, but I think if Florida are able to beat Dallas a second time in round 2, then I would be a firm believer that Florida will go back to back. Unless something absolutely comes lights out. Maybe Dallas end up polishing up a lot of different things because although that match be close, there were still a lot of plot holes for them to have to clean up. And same thing goes for Atlanta too. I think when you're thinking about the finals as a whole, it's going to be Florida versus either Dallas or Atlanta. But do they go back to back? I can't sit there and give you a definitive point. But if they do beat Dallas in round number 2, which is how I'm sure a lot of us are going to be building our brackets.
Nope.
Then yeah. Nope. You think you got London being Dallas?
Yeah.
I honestly I got to go into map 5, but I saw Dallas winning. Our producer, Mr. Jay Pistachio, saying that he lost full. I mean, he is an Empire fan. Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen. So I mean,
Look,
it's
it's the map matchups. Both of these teams like to play on the same spots, and beyond that, London has had a more convincing time in Search and Destroy in the last week and a half than
that's fair.
Dallas has. That's really what it comes down to. The map pools are extremely similar, in my opinion.
Man,
It's gonna go 5, but I think London takes the map 5 Search and Destroy.
Okay. Honestly, I mean, if Florida can punch an easy ticket like that, I could see them beating London 100%. Just from pace alone. Alone on respawn and search.
Here's my teams to get out of groups. Here's my teams getting out of group. I've got Florida, Dallas getting out of groups. Unfortunate for London because I think that they have a lot of potential, but I think the second time that Dallas and London play up against each other, Dallas takes it the second time. First time out, though, I've got London taking it. On the opposite side, Atlanta gets through. Optic Gaming LA gets through. I don't know, man. I don't know what it is about this Optic team lately, but there is something about the way that they've played over the last 2 weeks that has really showcased that they are not just a team that needed one player to get through, but the whole team has had to get some forward progress. And they have been complete across just about every single mode. Specifically, I'm most excited about watching this Optic team play in domination. That's where New York has been a little bit more questionable. And when you've got more consistency in that map 3, I think your chances of winning the series as a whole will go up. So that's why I kind of think there's the potential for Optic to feel a little bit more at odds to get through into the playoff than New York does. I still think Atlanta, this is the thing, we talked about Atlanta not doing well on Hardpoint this last week. I think all of those questions and all of those woes and concerns are alleviated mostly going into the next weekend. I have no doubt that Crowder and Easy Mac are going to sit down, figure out what's going wrong, and those 5 players will turn things around in 4 days to be good to go.
Oh, I agree fully. I just don't have OGLA beating New York in that first round. I'm not gonna lie to you.
It's gonna be a good game. It's gonna be an incredible game.
If you're looking for a really good match on the opening day of Paris, yeah, definitely look forward to that one. Dallas and London will probably be a close second for me. The marquee match being between Florida and Paris will be an utter stomping. Yeah, that's just unfortunate. I feel bad for Paris. I was on the Kismet hype train very early on in this season, as I'm sure that you remember. But again, it's just not there for them, unfortunately. Maybe they turn. I mean, we haven't seen them in what has it been, like 2, maybe 3 weeks at this point. Like maybe Paris? Maybe they just come lights out. Well, I don't know. I haven't watched them scrim. I couldn't tell you.
Here's the thing about Paris, and I think that as far as potential Cinderellas, I think you have to list Paris as being someone that everyone's going to overlook going into this weekend. When they last started the Seattle home series, yeah, they got technically DFR'd, but all of their hard points were within 40 points. There was not a hard point that they didn't find 200 points on. That was versus, again, the best hard point team of the game in Chicago and a very good hard point team in Optic Gaming LA, of which they beat on the Zero Cave 250-175. But beyond that, they were also competitive against both teams in the domination. I think there's absolutely potential that Paris could surprise. Do I think it's likely against how good Florida just looked? No. Not necessarily. Do I think they could beat London or Dallas? I don't like my odds, but I think that there is potential that Paris, you should not be as surprised. If Paris were to be able to find a way to beat Florida, there is very good potential that they could be in the playoffs.
If it goes to map 5, I'll definitely change my perspective. But
I mean, if Paris loses that first matchup, the chances of them getting into the playoffs are very slim to none.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if they get past Florida, I think both of those teams could still make it through the group stage.
I think you're mostly relying on Florida just not being consistent at that point.
I mean, it's hard for us to say that they would be. You know what I mean?
Sure. That's the first weekend that we've seen them with this 5. So I mean, yeah, it's definitely it's gonna be an exciting weekend. I'm excited. Be a good
weekend.
Yeah, because we finally get to see a lot of eye openers. Who's making the most impact coming in for their team? Cheeto for OGLA, Mac Melt's coming in for New York, Awakening coming in for Florida.
Yes.
And not to mention the buzz around just like Toronto as a whole. Is CleanX going to be playing? Are they not going to be playing? Oh yeah,
he's scrimming right now apparently with them. So
yeah. So I mean, hey, that's what the TL says, man. But going up against that first match against Atlanta, are you going to find the utmost value? Probably not. But I honestly, again, I wouldn't be surprised at this point if it goes to map 5, unless, like you said, that you have Crowder and Easy Mac that they go to the drawing board and they whip these 5 boys into shape coming this Paris weekend.
Yeah, I think Toronto gets DFR'd without question. I think everybody else has plausible deniability when it comes to will they have a chance to surprise. I think that in any
Fair.
of the other instances, London versus Dallas, Paris versus Florida, there's potential for upsets there. I think as we're just looking at them at first glance, you're just looking at them saying, oh, well, Florida, they just won. They should beat Paris. I think there's still potential for them to get surprised there, so don't overlook them. Let's talk viewer questions, though, as we wrap this episode up. A little bit longer than we wanted it to be, so we'll keep the viewer questions a little bit shorter here. And we've talked about a lot of the questions that have already come through. Actually, we've talked about mostly all of the questions that have come through.
Yeah, we have.
But I think it's actually worth meriting and kind of going back and checking out a couple of these to kind of give our final thoughts on. From underscore 38 baby underscore Joey asks, are the LA Gorillas, by the way, it's not gorillas like the mammal, it's gorillas like the military tactic, finally a threat with their roster change, or will they continue to stay in a slump? And was this week just a lucky week? My first reaction is, por qué no los dos? Why not a little bit of both? I think they had a little bit of a lucky week. I think some of the turnouts that they had in Hardpoint were, again, a little bit favorable, a little bit lucky for them. But the good news here is that you still won series without having to win both search and destroys. So I think that as terms of, are they going to be a threat? I think that you can no longer overlook LAG if you are a top 5 team right now.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I agree with everything that Schiff just said. And the only thing that comes to mind for LAG is just consistency. Can Saints play lights out like they did Saturday night, not lackluster like they did Saturday morning? That's what you're mostly looking at, is chemistry forever building for LAG. And again, just to make sure that you truly know that I actually agree with my co-caster for the first time in what seems like forever is that for LAG, you're mostly just looking at not, you can't take them for granted. Don't bat an eyelash at LAG if you're a top 4 team, because they will definitely surprise you if you do so, especially when you're going up against Vivid and SND.
Yeah. We already kind of talked about some of the other things. Is Florida a top 3 team? We kind of answered that as yes. The one question that we did not ask at all or answer at all actually comes out of Drippy Juice God. Hell of a username. Who do you think will win it all? With the most recent change, seeing Atlanta lose to a Florida Mutineer squad, Chicago not make a playoff, and Dallas having some troubles of their own, this league is up for grabs right now, proper. So who do you got winning the whole thing right now?
Winning champs?
Winning champs.
Atlanta FaZe. 100%. 100%.
100%?
I mean, you said right now. Said right now.
Yeah, right now, if you were to make a prediction for the end of the year.
Yeah.
You've got Atlanta FaZe winning it all. 100%.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because Crowder and Easy Mac. Players are very talented on this roster.
100%.
I don't know why you're surprised. I don't know why you're surprised.
They just lost to Florida. They almost lost to LAG.
Yeah.
How can you sit there and say 100%? No deniability.
Maybe 80-20.
They would.
Maybe
80-20. Thank you.
Maybe 80-20. Yeah, again, like I want to see what it looks like at Paris. Honestly speaking, like that was mostly of 100% just what we're all just like talking about, because the way that you talked about just Crowder and Easy Mac not even a few moments ago, like you kind of got my jimmies ruffled over here. I kind of want to see what they're actually able to showcase for coming Paris. But again, you got 5 talented individuals. Got a lot that you could be working with in the back end for this team. They literally have everything plus the moon to be able to try to make them a top contending team. But that extra 20% definitely comes through in taking teams for granted and getting a little bit too bigger for their britches in Hardpoint, and other teams figuring them out. Like LAG, it definitely is something you got to be concerned with. Even going up against Florida again, I think that's a matchup that you got to be concerned with.
For me, I think it just comes down to, what does the state of the world look like when playoffs comes around? If it's on LAN where maybe there's no audience, maybe it's just the teams, but they're playing on LAN, I don't think that you could make much consideration for Dallas or Florida right now. It's a lot of it. It's a lot of inexperience, a lot of young talent that I think playing online for 5, 6, 7 weeks in a row, and then all of a sudden playoffs is on LAN, whether there's a crowd or not. I think that change of environment is going to really mess with team players on both Dallas and Florida.
I mean, Shotzi in their last LAN too absolutely went off.
Got better, and LA absolutely got better, but there's still big causes for concern. When he was playing the weeks before. I would be again. I am on the Atlanta hype train, just not 100%. I would not be surprised to see Chicago pull something out either.
They got a lot
Online
of
or
work.
online.
Chicago's got a lot of work ahead of them. They got a lot of work. But I'm glad that you poised it that way too. Like,
Because
what if we
there
don't?
is very realistically a world, because like in the next couple of weeks, we're gonna see the NBA start back up at the ESPN World of Sports. The NHL is supposed to start doing things. We're seeing baseball come back in Korea and Japan with no audience. I would not be surprised
They're
if
playing
they
for stuffed
fly all the
animals.
players.
That's
They're
cute.
playing for stuff. That's such a good tweet, by the way. I love that. I would not be surprised if they bring all the teams together in one central location to play on land, but not have an audience.
If it does go back to land, then I coming back.
If it
into the
goes back
mix
to
for-
land, Atlanta's stock goes much higher in my book. If it stays
Sure.
online, I think teams
Sure.
like Dallas and Florida have a very good chance of winning.
Then you can also, if it goes back to land, then you can start talking about Minnesota again too. I mean, that's
very true.
that definitely adds a very interesting twisty tie to that question for sure, my friend. Yeah.
We went too long. This is a longer episode than we meant to be, so let's say bye-bye for now. Again, we're going to be doing the Defuse every single time after there is a CDL broadcast that happens. So please make sure you check with us next week after the event concludes. Not the event, but even the days themselves. They conclude on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I think we'll be doing one on Sunday immediately afterwards. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. Again, this has been the Defuse. Till next time, make sure that fuse stays lit. Don't let it fizzle out, and we'll catch you next week for Paris. So long.